Hi guys, and welcome back to another digital painting tutorial where we're going to do this iced coffee and books with fall vibes. Welcome to my channel, Creatively Me with Bree, and yes, I'm Bree. Be sure to pause this video. Here are the dimensions that we are working with today. So with that said, let's jump in. Here's my sketch, and I wanted to show that my background I have as a medium to medium light gray, and that's because it's easier on my eyes as well as easier on the camera to catch what I'm drawing. So first, I'm going to show you the one and only brush we will be using this entire piece, and that is the Inka brush under inking. So first, we are going to duplicate the layer, and then tap, maybe tap again, until it registers. And down here at the bottom, you could rename the brush if you wanted, but I'm going to keep it as Inka 1 because I will know which brush it is. And here are the only settings that we are changing, and that is on the taper. And so now the ends are much more tapered, and this is what I like to use in order to create some nice leaf shapes. This here is my color palette that I am working in. I do make some adaptations. This is more of a suggested color range, not necessarily exactly what I use. So first, I'm going to start working on the bottom book. I'm working on a new blank layer, and I am holding down my pen to get these straight lines. So, or my stylus. I'm drawing and holding down, and then it automatically snaps to a straight line. Before we fill this area, we want to make sure that all of the lines connect and there are no gaps. So that way, when we drag the color over, it fills the area intended and not the full page or the full layer. While we finish this part up, I gotta tell you guys, I have an autoimmune disease that flares up from time to time. And I had to record this 3 times because I am so tired that I kept making mistakes. It was ridiculous, but it's okay. I did it. I made it. We made it. We're here. I turn off or hide the sketch layer so that I can better see how the paint is looking without the sketch in the way. Not that the sketch is a problem. We like the sketch. It's just unfortunately the sketch, you know, it has to move sometimes. So now I'm just going in using the eraser. The eraser is also set to Inka, just like our brush. And that is so that we can keep the integrity of the texture so that the piece has a consistent feel throughout. All right, when we feel good about it, we're going to go back into layers, select the sketch mode, and then add a layer above the sketch but below the book cover. We're going to select this cream color, and we are going to use it as the book pages, at least the foundation color, and I'll show you how we'll be coloring it in further in just a moment. Somehow I got that there, so I just erase it. And I go back to brushing using my Inka brush and make sure, right, we want to make sure that everything's filled. There are no gaps between the lines so that when we go to fill the area, it actually fills correctly. Returning to the layers, we are going to put the book pages on alpha lock. I'm going to move the sketch up and turn it on. And now I am going to select, it's a slightly grayer but still in the yellow tones that we've been using. And now I'm just filling this part of the book to be just a little bit darker so we have a delineation between the top of the book and the side of the book. Now I'm going to select the lighter color just so I can correct the line delineation. And then I'm going to select the color on the side of the book that's a little more shadowed. And I'm going to add a new layer and create a clipping mask so that I can draw directly on top of the pages. I could have kept it in alpha lock. I decided not to just in case I didn't like the way that it was looking, so I wouldn't have to keep repainting. Now, I decided to go with an even darker grayish yellow color for the shadow pages over on this side. When I'm finished, I go back into layers, I combine the clipping mask to the page itself, and then I go back to the cover, make sure I like the way that it looks and the way that it interacts with the layer beneath it, because I'm about to combine them. And that's because with the size of this particular canvas, I only have 31 layers to work with, which could absolutely be more than enough, but it gives me anxiety. So I combine when I feel pretty confident about where I'm at. You do not have to do that. You're not obligated to follow that exact same step that I make. If you would feel more comfortable keeping things in separate layers for longer, by all means do that. But this is where I combine them. So I pinch them together, or I can select the top layer and select merge down. If you hold your finger down over a color, it will sample the color, at least based on my current settings. So I am going to select a slightly lighter blue or teal type color and add a new layer above the book that we just made. I also hide the book so that we can focus on the next book above it without it interfering. I'll double check in a moment that the colors go well together, but I can easily make that change. So once again, I'm drawing a line and holding down to create an automatic straight line. Dragging across, holding down, and now I can adjust my straight line. I close off any gaps that I see so that I can easily drag the color over and fill. If it's not filling correctly, slide without lifting your pen from the left to the right to see which threshold is the correct one for you. Now I'm looking at the colors side by side, and I decide, at least at this stage, they look like they go well together. So now I'm coloring the thin spine of the book, and now the underside of the book as well, of the cover. And just like you would do with working with traditional art, where you would like rotate your paper or even rotate your canvas, you obviously can rotate your canvas inside of the PROCREATE app. And if that would help you get better line work, do it. Absolutely do that. For the longest time, I actually would accidentally move the iPad rather than the canvas on the iPad. It literally took me like a full year to break the habit. Now going back into layers, I select the book at the bottom and I hit the plus sign to create a new layer so that it appears under the book cover that we just painted. And since this layer is underneath another layer and we can't see all that is happening underneath, you don't have to stress as much about the lines. It's more about making sure that they are just underneath the actual book cover so that they don't leak out onto the page, and that there are no gaps, so when we go to fill, like color fill, that it color fills correctly. So see, real messy, but as long as it works and it looks right with the other layer on top, it's okay. It's going to be okay, even as ugly as it is. And then we fill it. When we put the layer back on, this is how it looks. And that's with the other book. So now I'm double checking that the colors look correct to me, that they're sitting well. I decide to go into the adjustments and I just make it a little bit darker. Selecting this color, I make sure I make some adjustments because we have not combined this cover to the pages yet, and now is the perfect time to make sure that I like each layer exactly as it is before I finalize it by combining them. Going back into layers, I'm going to select the pages and touch up the areas that I feel need touching up. I continue to do this on both the cover and the pages until I feel satisfied with the overall look. So here's me on the pages, touching it up again. When I'm satisfied with the way that it looks, I go to the shadowed side of the book and sample the color, go to the pages layer that I'm currently working on and select Alpha Lock. And now I'm filling in that side of the book with the same shadowed color that we used with the book beneath. Here I am again showing this color and this color are the same. I am going to add a new layer above the pages and select clipping mask so that I can draw on these pages here the details and not worry about whether or not I'll like it. If I don't, I can just delete it and start again, or I can clear the layer. I go down to the bottom book, select the darker gray that I use for the book pages on the side, draw in the lines to represent the pages of the book. I didn't want the lines to be too straight. I want the books to look like they've been well read. Opening my layers, I combine the clipping mask to the pages and the book cover to the pages as well. Then I hit the plus sign to create a new layer. I hold down my finger on the book to grasp the color, and now I select a slightly lighter color as our third book color. I wanted them to be more monochromatic because I didn't want too many competing colors, because I knew that the elements in the background would already have a lot of color variation and I didn't want it to be too competing. So I tried to make the books sort of their own unit as much as possible. Here I used the same method as I did on the first and the second book. I drew my lines, made sure there were no gaps, and then filled the layer. I removed the sketch, and now I'm double checking that my line work is how I would like it to be for the final product. I'm not super thrilled with this color, so I go into adjustments and I take the saturation down just a touch, as well as dim the brightness just a bit. And now it feels like it matches with the tones of the other books that it's stacked on. At least I think so. On the same layer that we've been working on, I continue to paint the rest of this book cover. And as we did with the other layers, I take all the other distractions away so we can see how our book cover is looking and if there are any adjustments that we need to make, which obviously there are. Now we're going to go back into layers, select the book we were last working on, add a new layer so that it appears beneath this current layer. And now we are going to put down the foundational color of the pages. It's the same cream color that we used on the other two books beneath this one. Like before, make sure that you close all the lines and that there are no gaps so that when you go to color fill by dragging the color in, that everything fills correctly, like this. Also, guys, if I don't sound nearly as cheerful as I normally do, it's because I am currently having an autoimmune flare-up, and I am just exhausted. But I've made this commitment, so I'm going to follow through with it. But my sass is a little bit dialed down, and I apologize. On the pages that we've been working on, select Auto Lock, so that we can do the shadowed side of the pages again. I'm sorry that I missed the opportunity to say that at the exact correct time, but I am working on it. The color that we are currently using, we can now use to make the lines of the pages. So we want to create a new layer above the pages. Oh, I slow down here. Look at me go. Add. Then I want to go to clipping mask. And then I'm going to use that color. I must have had a moment here where I was like, slow down. Remember, this is a tutorial. People need you to go slower. I'm really trying, guys. In order to select the correct color for the pages on the shadowed side, I unhide the books beneath this one and select the color pages from the bottom book by holding down my finger over the color that I want to sample. Okay, and since I'm pleased with the way this looks, I combine the clipping mask to the pages and the cover to the pages, and now look, we have 3 books. Grab and slide to the right to select whatever books are not selected and press group. Now I can name them books. Also, I know I did that entirely too fast and I am so sorry. I will get better about being slower. So now I want to make sure I add a layer and drag it down beneath the books, and I add a layer above the books just so that way I have layers already ready for me. So for the layers under the books, I want to do this area up in the front. So I pick the nice, very dark brown red. No, that's not its official color, but that's what I'm calling it. And I'm using the Inca brush at a very large size to create. The harder you press and sort of like short brush strokes help create this sort of leaf shape that you're seeing. And we're just going to build up the colors. So after that, I pick a slightly brighter, redder color. I don't know why I sound so confused about that. I just brush them in here and there to give the illusion of there are like leaves in shadow, and this also helps to create depth. I am painting this on one layer, but if you would feel more comfortable to test out different colors, I would recommend using a couple of different layers, and like we did with the books, once you like how it looks, then you can merge them together. So right now I decided I'm going to trust my ability to do this. Was that the smartest thing to do? It did work out this time, but I'm here to tell you it doesn't always work out. So now I want some of those leaves to be in front of the books, because then it will look like the leaves are not just flat, but active. So I go back into the book group that we have, and I add a new layer on top of all 3 books. I suppose I could have just made sure that it was above the bottom book, but there you have it. The most important thing is you know where your layers are and what they're doing. All right, we're going to put that sketch back on to see what else there is to paint. Lots more. Let's do it. I go back to the bottom layer that's underneath the books, right? Or behind the books, because a lot of the elements appear behind the books. And I hesitantly, apparently, select a new layer and then finally begin. I choose like a red. It's not like a red. It is a red. It's a red color. And I draw in this leaf. I don't know if anybody else does this, but like I sometimes get overwhelmed or intimidated by some of the elements in my own pieces. So I'm like looking around. I'm like, what would make me feel good? The berries. Don't ask me why, but it was the berries. I'm still on that same layer. You can, of course, choose to be on multiple layers, but because these are so far apart, the elements are not touching, I felt pretty good about the fact that I could paint them, and if I needed to change one, there were easy ways to do that without disrupting the other. I create a new layer beneath the current layer that we're working on, which is the berries. It also has that red leaf, so that I can create these lines without worrying about them accidentally disrupting the berry painting. Once I'm happy with them, I do combine them with that layer. I'm not happy with the way this berry is shaped. And now I combine them. Maybe, kind of, merged down. Still combined, but you know what I mean. On a new layer, though you could choose to stay on the layer, it's up to you. But the reason why I typically separate layers is when there are potential or are in fact overlapping elements. I don't want them to touch one another unless I'm certain I like the way they look, because it's a lot harder to make adjustments if they're merged on the same layer and touching. If they aren't touching, there's easy ways around that you can do in order to make those adjustments, whether it's color or shape, whatever it might be. But that is why I'm working on another layer with some of these. As you can see, for personal as well as tutorial reasons, I do best using multiple layers and ensuring before I merge anything, if I merge anything, that I feel confident in the way that it looks. I did feel that I ended up merging layers that I likely wouldn't have before, but due to the limitations on how many layers were available, I made the decision to combine so that I didn't have to worry about that later on in the project. I'm not pleased with this particular color orange, so I go into the adjustments for the color and I make it a little bit darker. I add a new layer. The most important part about this layer is that it is beneath the books, because we still need these fall elements to be behind the book covers. I can always adjust where they are with the other fall elements since it is on its own layer, but the most important thing is that right now it's placed underneath the book stack. Once I have these petals drawn, I drag the color over and I click color filling, and now I can automatically fill the leaves so long as they are closed and there are no gaps. I randomly decide that I have to add this detail right this moment, so I add this detail to this berry. There will be details added later on many of these elements, but for some reason I really wanted this highlight on the berry this instant, so enjoy. Now I believe we're about to tackle the mushroom. I add a new layer underneath the books, and I create what is this? The stem of the mushroom? Quick, someone give me mushroom anatomy. For some reason it doesn't want to work, but I get it to work. On a new layer above the mushroom layer, I am creating the stems, I don't know, of the mushrooms in front of it. I just want to make sure that they are how I want them to look before I merge those layers together to conserve layer space. And now I'm going to add a new layer above the mushrooms and then, combine them. And now I'm going to do the mushroom caps, the tops of the mushrooms. I'm going to choose a pretty vibrant red. Going back into my layers, I'm going to go to the stem, create a new layer, and then put a clipping mask on so that I can add details now onto the mushrooms. Once I like the details that I have on the body of the mushrooms, I sample the red color of the mushroom cap and I merge the clipping mask details to the mushroom body, and I return to the mushroom cap layer, which we're on now, so that I can paint in these details. Again, I apologize if I go a little too fast in my tutorials. I will try to work on slowing down to further explain what I'm doing at a pace that's a little bit easier to follow. I combined those layers, so now the mushroom is all on one layer itself. I return back to this layer with the orange floral design, and I pick a slightly darker color that's in the same color range, put on alpha lock, and now I just add some just minor details with just some brush strokes here and there. Going back into my layers, I select this particular branch of leaves, and I take the eraser because I see there are just certain shapes that I'm not liking, and I want to make sure that I have that worked out before I start painting on top of it. And like the other layers we've just done, I'm going to go to the yellow leaf now. Make sure that I select the color. Make sure that I like the shape of the leaf before I start painting more detail on it. I'm going to select a lighter color rather than a darker color this time. And I'm going to create a lighter stem. In this particular instance, I didn't use alpha lock just because I was working on such a large space. I didn't feel like I needed it, but you can absolutely put it on alpha lock if that would make you feel safer about your line work, staying inside the leaf. I combine those layers together, and I end up deciding to combine all of those layers because I'm happy with the way majority of it looks. Now I'm going to put alpha lock on that layer so that I can start to paint this leaf. I do end up changing the design later, but it's very similar to this. I just felt like I could make it a little bit better. And finally, we are about to work on the pumpkin in the background and the elements next to it. So first, let's start by adding a layer. Make sure that layer is underneath the book stack. That's the most important part. Next, I pick a orangish brown color and I make it more orange and a little bit, darker. And I'm using that specifically for the acorn here. There's another acorn involved in this piece. So once I'm done making this, I'm going to duplicate it so that I don't have to recreate it twice. You could totally paint it twice if that's what you want, so that each one is individual and has its own unique feel. And now I'm going to take off the sketch so that I can see the shape, so that I can rework it to make sure that I like exactly the way that it appears. And I end up not caring for the shape of the acorn, so I do correct that here. Once I like what I'm seeing, I go back into the layers, combine the top of the acorn with the body of the acorn, the cap of it, if you will, and I bring the other acorn above the book. Now you can see where it's supposed to go. And now I can hit the transform tool, press on flip horizontal, and I also chose bilinear in terms of resizing this, which it can lose some pixelation. You will have to figure out which of those settings works best for you in your piece. And there we go. At this point, I decide I'll just bring the other acorn up because it's not touching anything else on that back layer, and that way I can combine the two and make it easier to keep track of them and also paint them. So I put that layer on alpha lock, and then I work on the, I was going to call it a mushroom cap. It is not, the acorn cap. And I start with these downward lines. I do end up making an adjustment in a moment, because I'm just sort of testing out if that's how I want the design to be. I also decide to create just a little bit of a shadow on the underside with some cool colors. It's like a cooler brown. And just trying to create some of that shape and texture on the acorn. All right, so now I sample the color by holding down the dark part on the acorn cap, and then I draw in some lines in the opposite direction so that they're like crossing. And I decide I like that better, so I keep it and I combine the clipping mask to the actual layer. I select the layer that has the fall elements behind the book stack already established. I take off the alpha lock so that we can draw this little stem here. Sorry guys, it's late. I'm tired. My kids are living their best life, but they are distracting me. And that's okay. I'm glad they're enjoying their life. And here we go. And I accidentally undo it, so I just have to redraw it there. All right, I add a new layer on top because I want to try out adding additional colors to the stem, like additional leaves, if you will. Here we go. All right, now we're going to work on the pumpkin in the background. I want to make sure that I'm on the layers in the back. I do the pumpkin on its own layer because I know that I'm going to need the space to paint it, and it does overlap with other elements, so I give it its own layer for now at least. Okay. So now that we have that layer filled, we are going to add a new layer underneath it and make it a slightly darker orange. And this darker orange is going to act as the back side of the pumpkin, where we're seeing that it's a little bit darker and sort of cast in shadow. Now we're going to put a new layer in between the top of the pumpkin and the back of the pumpkin. So we want it squished in the middle there. And then we're going to create the stem. And then, see when you paint, it goes behind the pumpkin, but on top of the back of the pumpkin. And there we go. So I combine the layers because I like the way it looks and I don't think I'll be changing it. And then I hide the other layers just so I can see my pumpkin more clearly. Though you won't see the pumpkin, I decide I must know what my pumpkin looks like, so I make sure it is somewhat more filled in and complete. I put my pumpkin on alpha lock and I select a slightly lighter color so that I can start to create the color depth that I'm looking for, the highlights and midtones and shadow. so that I can see if it's looking correct so far and if there are any areas that need more color. I put all of the layers back on and I can tell that we need shadow down there. So I grab the color from the top and I lighten it just a touch. I don't want it to be too dark back here, but just enough to imply that the pumpkin does in fact have a multitude of colors and that it is behind the book stack. Now I'm going to go back into layers. I want to make sure that I select this color and that I do in fact still have the alpha lock on. And now I'm going to swoop at a slight angle to create the stem. I grab the dark color back and I just try to wind it back in so it looks like it's cast in a little bit of shadow and there are some nice grooves in the stem. So right there I have a cinnamon stick. I end up deciding on placing it somewhere else, but I'm going to show you how we make the cinnamon stick right now. And yes, it's on its own layer. Okay, so I finally find a place that I feel like it rests okay, but I don't feel like the color is correct. So what we end up doing is tilting it just a little bit more so the composition, I feel, sits better. But then we go back into adjustments and take the brightness down as well as turn up the saturation. And this is what we land on. And I like that better. However, I do go in and I lighten some of this up so that it is easier to read visually on the eye. It's at this moment that I find that the pumpkin color is also not my favorite, so I darken it some, increase the vibrancy or saturation and the brightness, and I feel much better about how that's looking. I also go to the layer above that carries this branch here, and I use the freehand selection tool to grab it so that I can also specifically adjust the colors under adjustments. Now we're going up to layer 7, which should still be a blank layer. I put it there before as a placeholder in case I needed an extra layer. Don't ask me why. And now we're putting in these little floral elements. I add a couple extra because I just feel like it needed it. Now on a new layer underneath the flower layer that we just worked on, I'm going to create the illusion of shadow. So I'm going to pick, well, it is going to be a shadow, but I'm not going to use like black. I picked just a slightly darker, like teal. I don't even know if you'd call that teal, but you know, that color on the book cover. So I end up having to grab and then find a slightly darker color to use as the shadow. And I repeat this around all the elements that are resting on the book. And I do the same for this flower up here. And I also end up doing it for the acorn as well. Eventually. But apparently not yet. So I'm going to select a dark red. There it is. And I'm going to use that for the center details of the flower elements. When I'm done with this portion, I then sample the color that we were working on for the flower petals, and now I have selected a slightly lighter color to go on top so that we can color the petals with just a little bit more detail, just so they can stand out just a teeny tiny bit more. Now we're going to do some coffee beans. I picked this brown, but then I just feel like it's too dark, so I do end up lightening it in just a moment. But I'm just double checking my layers, making sure I'm where I want it all to be, coloring in the area. So I'm going to the selection tool at the top, freehand. Then I go to adjustments and I just make it a bit lighter. This will make it easier to see and also easier to create the darker shadowed part of the coffee bean. And then I make sure that I get the shape of it correct, because I don't care for it right now. So look at that, so much better already. Now I did have another coffee bean in my sketch, so I end up duplicating this by tracing it, copying it, and then flipping the image horizontally, and now it's all combined on one layer. I create a new layer again underneath the flower and coffee bean, and I just put in the shadows. And I believe this might be where I decide to do the acorn, hopefully. No, it's not. My goodness. Oh, but I see it. Finally. All right, here we go. I don't even think I put on a new layer. I just said screw it. Oh no. It's all good. Whatever I just did, it's fine. It works. All right, I decide the books also need shadow, so I go beneath the first book and add a layer. I then take the shadow color we've been using and start to create some lines. Now, you can definitely go deeper on some of the details for this. I could have put shadow down on the pages, and I should have. I just, it escaped my notice at the time, because it does overlap, and like this top book hangs over the second book, which means there would be a shadow cast on the pages of the second book, but it's okay. We can just fix that off camera when no one else is looking. All right, then I select the bottom book and add a new layer above it. And that also means it's below the middle book. And now I'm adding the shadow there. All right. We're almost to the iced coffee, guys. So now on the layer of the top elements, the ones that are resting on top of the book, I'm going to grab this yellow. And I'm going to make a leaf using that yellow over here. And I'm going to fill it, take that sketch off, and now I can see what it looks like and how the colors are looking alongside the rest of it, like the rest of the piece. I'm so tired, guys. Bear with me. And now, I'm just getting in the stem of the leaf. All right, and you guessed it. On a new layer underneath this one, I am adding some more shadow. So the leaf is not just floating. And now, ta-da! Guys, it's about to get so much more fun. So now we get to do the iced coffee. I leave out the straw. I might add the straw later, but for now, for this piece, I decided against the straw. All right, on a new layer, we're going to eventually pick a color. I picked the shadow color, the color that we used for the shadowed side of the pages. I didn't want it to be like white. I think it would just be a little too stark against some of the other colors in the piece. So I went with this. It's like, like a cream white yellow-ish. And I'm just taking my time, getting the shape of the outline the way that I want it to look. All right, guys, look at that empty cup. That's a great empty cup right there. And like the previous layers, I am going to create a shadow. So I want to go underneath both layers because I am going to combine this shadow with the top elements like the beans and the leaf right there. And I go in and then I combine them. And now we add a new layer underneath the cup because I want to keep that outline of the cup. And now I add some medium brown for the foundational base color of the coffee. Make sure there are no gaps, and then I can color fill. Alrighty, and I just make sure none of it sticks out or that it reaches all the way to the edge, so I make sure it does that. And now we have coffee, almost. We're getting there. So next we're going to add a layer underneath the brown coffee that we just did, and we're going to do a slightly darker color to act as the top part of the coffee, like at the angle. So now we're seeing the top of the coffee. All right, next we're going to put a layer above the main brown coffee, and I'm going to do these dark swirlies. And then I'm going to go down to liquefy. And these are the settings that it's presently on. You can pause and look. And then I mush them around. And then I erase the ones that came out of the side of the cup. on a new layer above the swirls, I grab a bluish, greenish gray so that I can start putting in like the illusion of ice being like pressed up against the glass and also floating atop the surface of the iced coffee. I feel like it's a little too saturated, so I do go into the actual layer, hit the end there, and then I take the opacity down quite a bit so that way it's there, but also we're getting color from the mixed coffee, like the cream and the coffee combining. You're getting some of those colors bleeding through. And then I'm going in on a new layer that is unaffected by the opacity difference and highlighting certain areas. And I'm doing a little bit more scribbling here. I'm not as worried about clean lines, simply because ice has texture and I really wanted to try and get as much of like an ice effect as possible. And this is not, I've never painted ice or iced coffee before, so this is a first for me, especially in this style. I feel like realism actually might be easier for me, but trying to figure out how to create this in a stylized version was a little hard for me at first, but I think it reads by the end. Now I'm going to select a darker color because there will be darker parts in the coffee as well as in the ice cube, because the ice will be picking up all kinds of different colors from both inside the glass and outside of the glass. Okay, and then I decide that I need to make it look less perfect, to make it look more real. So I sampled the brown color and made some, like, inconsistencies around the surface of the cup. And I think that really helps start to sell the idea of like ice floating in this iced coffee. All right, now into layers, we're going to add, well, are we? No, maybe. We're going to combine those first. Then we're going to add a new layer. Haha. And this is where I'm going to put in a slightly more caramel color, because I do want there to be just a bit more color variation. All right, and now as I'm looking, I'm zooming in, zooming out, trying to look at my piece, I notice this line down there is just standing out way too much. So I select that layer and I use the selection tool, the freehand selection tool, and then I'm going over to adjustments, where you can adjust the hue, saturation, and brightness, and I'm making it darker so that way it doesn't stand out too much anymore. Oh, we're so close to being done. On a new layer, I make it a clipping mask for some reason. I don't know why. I mean, I guess I know why. You can make it, if you're afraid you're not going to keep it in the lines, guys, you can make it a clipping mask. If you think you can keep it inside the cup, you don't need it. It's up to you. And I just go to liquefy, and I just very lightly use the liquefying tool to get that effect, and I think I'm done. I think we're done, guys. I think we did it. Oh my gosh. Why am I still doing stuff? Okay, this is the end though, right? Okay, look at though. Watch. I'm going to take the opacity down. Oh, it looks so cute. And I'm not done, because I can't walk away from this piece so easily. I decide I must work on this leaf, this one leaf. I have the alpha lock on. I decide to put a new layer with a clipping mask though, just in case I really don't like the way I adjusted the leaf. And then from there, I make some swoopy lines to create stems. And then a slightly lighter red color and just create some variation in the color of the leaf. I think this does look better. I feel like it's not nearly as distracting as it looked before. I think it would have been fine, but obviously I'm up close and personal to this piece, so I'm like, ugh. And then I feel like the leaves at the front were too dark, so I went to the layer that hosted them, and I went into the adjustments. I put the saturation up, I put the brightness up, and now we have a much happier, jollier looking iced coffee fall leaf book scene. I put the black background just so you could see it with a fresh set of eyes what it looks like, and this is the finished product. Thank you guys so much for sticking with me through this tutorial. I have some tutorial requests that I am working on now, and I look forward to posting them for you guys soon. Okay, bye.